showing them that we can provision an environment, 0 to everything in 15 minutes.
So hi, I'm Abby. I have a knitting problem. I actually have lots of knitting problems, which is why I ended up making Chartminder. So, out of interest, who knows how to knit? Show of hands. Okay, so you should all go and learn to knit later because it's great and it will change your life. So I've been developing for about 15 years, and for the last 5 years I've been knitting, and during that time the more that I learned about knitting, the more I sort of saw common things between developing and knitting. I mean, they're both just building stuff with threads. So I realized that they're quite similar, and knitting's quite nerdy, so I'm going to tell you about some of the things that are difficult in knitting to explain the problems that I had. So mostly maths. Maths is difficult. Everyone's heard the stereotypical story of, oh, Granny's knitted you a sweater for Christmas. You open it and it's 10 sizes too big. That's because sizing is really, really difficult when it comes to knitting because of maths. This is an excerpt from just any knitting pattern. You can already see some similarities. This is not code. You know, things like continue in stockinette stitch until whichever number you need for your size inches. So the things that vary in knitting for your sizing that you need to know about, 3 core things. The type of yarn you're going to be using is going to make a big difference to what size your garment comes out. So obviously bulky yarn will end up with bigger fabric. Thinner yarn is going to be smaller. You might have high twist, low twist. It might be silky. It might be coarse. So that's the first thing. Then you have your needle size. So bigger needles are going to produce thicker fabric, depending on the yarn as well. Then you have your personal knitting style. So you may just naturally be a tight knitter or a loose knitter, and that's going to affect the size of the fabric that you're making. So the way that we approach this problem as knitters, you decide on the project that you're going to knit, and you start with a swatch, a bit like this. So for this project, I'd already chosen the yarn that I wanted. I'd chosen the pattern that I wanted. And it says, the first thing it says is, your gauge should be 26 stitches per 4 inches. So you knit your swatch and you measure and count 4 inches. How many stitches do I have? In an ideal world, you end up with the same amount of stitches that it says in the pattern. And you start and you knit and it's great. That never happens. So what are the things we can do when your gauge doesn't match? Well, you think about the variables again. Either you change the yarn, but, you know, I've already bought this yarn, it's expensive, I don't want to buy more yarn. You can't really change your personal knitting style, so that's out. Needle size is usually the thing that you'll change, but, you know, I quite like this fabric, the way that it kind of drapes and the sort of lightness of it. I don't want to make it more dense, I don't want smaller needles, I don't want to change that. So I can do some maths. And this is where it gets a bit more nerdy. So either you can adjust the pattern that you already have to fit what your measurements are, or you can choose to do a different size based on what ratios of gauge difference that you have to what it's asking for in the pattern. So that's one of the problems. Another problem is charts. So another way to represent knitting patterns is to use charts like this. Hopefully you can see. So this one on the left particularly is what incentivized me to start this website that I'm going to tell you about. I saw this pattern and immediately thought, this is the coolest sweater I've ever seen. I need it right now. So I found my yarn, I did my swatch. I was way off. And then similarly for the one on the right, this is actually a fairly straightforward chart. The red box around, if you can see, that's where you're going to repeat that section. So in this case, it was around the yoke of a sweater. Seems straightforward. I had the right gauge, but I changed the black to white, I changed the white to green, I changed the green to black. So, and you never normally sort of pick up a project, start, knit to the end, and finish. You know, you'll sort of do a few inches, lose it under the bed, go and leave it at someone's house, wait for them to post it back to you. You know, you're never working through to the end, so it gets confusing to remember where you're up to, which substitutions you've made, and things like that. So I thought there's got to be a better way to do these things, to do the maths for me and to keep track of what's going on with these projects. So I built this prototype. So this is the first sort of version of Chartminder. It's basically fancy graph paper. So down the left you can see there's some options for, what have we got? Grid size, so you can say, right, I know I want a pattern of 15 rows and 5 stitches, and I want these colours, and you can put in your gauge as well, and it will tell you the measurements that it's going to be. Or you can put in an existing pattern, so you can actually scan existing images, and it will generate this pattern for you from an image, and then change the measurements to what you want, change your gauge to what you've got, and then it will tell you how big it's going to be. So I left this, put a link to it in Ravelry, which is like Facebook for knitting, and I left it for a few months. And then when I came back to it, I had a look, and I actually had, you know, about 200 people using it, and I thought, oh, okay, some nice comments coming in as well. Maybe I should spend a bit more time on this. And it actually also ended up getting me my job at Poetica through some crazy networking thing, so that was great. So I decided to put a bit more time into it, and with the help of one of my designer friends, it now looks a bit more like this, which is slightly nicer, if you can see it on there. So this is a new version. It's a bit tidier, has all the same features. There's some new stuff as well, and now that it looks kind of proper, I've got about almost 8,000 users and over 13,000 charts on my site, which may not sound like a lot, but I'm really proud of it. So now you can actually make things that you chart public as well. So this is just a list yesterday of some of the stuff that people have listed to be public. So you can go and sign up and look through all the stuff people have made, which is pretty cool. It's a bit like Instagram for knitting charts. So, you know, this is calling out for like a favorite button, really on here. So with the theme of side projects and trying to encourage and inspire people to do their own side projects, here's some of the stuff that I've found interesting or difficult that I was not necessarily expecting. So the first one is my responsibility to this community of people. With all these charts and all these people using my site, you know, they're spending hours of their time making these charts to support their own side projects. And there's knitwear designers, and they're selling their patterns and stuff like that. And I have this real responsibility now to these people to, you know, look after their cherished stuff, which is like, that's a big deal, which I was not expecting that to happen. There's also community management. Anytime that there's a social space online, it seems, even if they can't directly talk to each other, people seem to want to start arguing over things, or, you know, people go crazy. I actually had, recently I signed on to look at what people have been making, and there was a chart called, titled, Abolish Human Abortion, which, I mean, put me into a quandary over, I mean, what I think about this topic is irrelevant, but on one hand, it's not up to me to say what people want on their sweater. You know, if you want to knit that, fine, put it on the site. But also, it's tricky to have something like that that's such a sort of big statement that's next to my brand on my website. So I was kind of not really sure what to do about that. But thankfully, a couple of days later, somebody made another chart that ended up sat almost next to it on the chart listings called Keep Abortion Legal. So suddenly people are using my site to sort of have these interesting rivalry of knitting charts, which is kind of cool, I guess. And the last one, managing user expectations. So now the site sort of looks professional. A lot of the time, people will turn up and they think it's a thing, that there's like a company doing this, and they turn up on my forums and they're like, oh, I want to speak to somebody about, I'm trying to use this on IE5, and this, it should really definitely work on 800 by 600 screens, and you must fix these problems. And it's like, this is just me. I'm the only person working on this. I spend a lot of time on it, and not that I don't care. Obviously, I would love to do all that stuff, but it's something you have to manage. People expect it now to work. This is probably the biggest one that I've realized. I mean, being a developer through my career, when I sort of started out, I was very like, I want to do everything on my own, or not on my own, but I want to just get in the zone and do my own thing, and all distractions were kind of annoying. But it's only when I've worked on Chartminder completely alone that I realize how difficult it is to work on something completely alone. Most of my ideas that I have are no good until I've discussed them with other people. And that's something that now I really understand a lot better, how important it is to have people around you to bounce your ideas off and to help you develop your own sort of stuff. And luckily, the people that I work with at Poetica are really supportive. I've got some great friends and knitting community, obviously, as well, helping me with this stuff. But it's still been difficult. Time management is always a thing. As a few other speakers have said, that if you have a side project, you really want it to stay sort of fun. But if you're trying to manage your time, it's difficult to not feel guilty sometimes for not spending more time on the thing that, all these people are asking for stuff, for help, for whatever. And it's like, yes, I would love to be able to spend all my free time working on this, but also, I want to do other stuff. I want a life. I want to go and, get drunk and stuff like that. So it's really difficult to have this kind of conflict with myself sometimes, where I feel like, oh, I should be doing this, but I'd rather be doing something else. So that's kind of difficult to manage for myself. And then lastly, maintaining motivation. Sometimes it will be a month and I've not done anything on the site at all. I try not to feel bad about it. And when it comes down to choosing what to work on, so I say I have a day to work on the site, and I'll think, right, usually if I was at work, I would, okay, what's the most important thing that needs doing? And that's the thing I would end up doing. But with this, often the most important thing is not the thing I care about the most. So I don't have a boss on this. So I can just do the things that I want to do. And that's the way that I stay motivated, is I do the things that are fun and that I want to do, rather than what I probably should be doing, which is probably a bad thing as well, but it keeps me sort of motivated. So despite all these kind of tricky things, it still has been a really awesome project for me, and really proud of it. And now I don't have to have these horrible knitting problems so much anymore, because I can use this. So I'm going to show you a couple of things that people have made on the site. Some cool charts. And this one's pretty good too. And I did actually finish the octopus sweater, but even though I went through this whole ordeal of building this website to do it, it actually still does not fit. So here's the sweater. And that's it from me. Thanks for listening.